You know, it has its own personality and does its own thing. It's steel. I need to come up with something intelligent to say. Can we redo this?
If you guys have seen anything I've done before, you might know that I have a soft spot for any brand that's doing something a little bit different. I'm Mike Levy here in a very rainy Pemberton, BC, and this is Starling's 140mm travel Murmur. It's a steel-tubed trail bike, and in case you can't tell, Starling is definitely doing something a little bit different. Now, I know that your carbon fiber mountain bike is lighter and it's stiffer and it's more optimized, it's probably more expensive, and that is great. But it's also not for everybody. There are tons of people out there who want something a little bit different. Now, Starling has made their Murmur trail bike using 853 Reynolds steel. The idea there is that it imbues a certain ride quality that might be a little bit different than what your carbon fiber or aluminum mountain bike offers. Put next to those, I think the Starling definitely has a sort of classic look that is definitely going to appeal to a lot of people. Now let's take a closer look at some of the details. Up front, there's a head tube gusset that does a few things. I'm sure it makes the front of the bike stronger, but it also helps with cable management. Those cables are tucked in behind it. And if you look closely, there's a couple laser-cut Starling birds in there. Now, you're not going to find that feature on a Trek or Specialized. Moving farther back, there is room for a bottle inside the front triangle. Now, you mount it up here underneath the top tube. There's an integrated seat post clamp, and at the bottom of the seat tube, you're going to find the entry port for the dropper post line. Some of the details that you will find include boost spacing, a threaded bottom bracket, room for a 2.6-inch wide rear tire, and room for a 200mm rear rotor. Now, you could also pick up your Murmur in just about any color you want. They offer a custom paint program, and if you're worried about rust, if you live somewhere that's as rainy as here, you could also get the front triangle made out of stainless steel, which is a pretty neat option. On to geometry. Now, Starling says that with a 160mm fork, the Murmur has a 64.6 degree head angle and a 76.6 degree seat angle. But our bike showed up with this 150mm Öhlins fork, which means that those numbers are a tiny bit steeper. Onto the Murmur's rear suspension, and that is where you're going to find the latest cutting-edge tri-link no, that's not true. All you're going to find is one pivot and a whole lot of steel. Starling says that this rear end is made to work specifically with coil-sprung shocks as well, like the Öhlins that ours showed up with. No geometry adjustment back here, no suspension adjustment, just one pivot and not a whole lot to look after. So, does this steel single pivot machine ride any different to the carbon Wonder bikes and aluminum machines that we have here? Let's talk to Casimir and Alicia and find out what the story is. All right, guys, I look at the Murmur and I see a lot of steel. I see one pivot. I see a coil sprung rear shock, and I have to guess that it's a poor climber. Am I wrong?
Partially wrong, yeah.
Moderately wrong, yeah.
I mean, it's not the first time.
Yeah.
We know.
Yeah. So what's the story here?
It's a pretty decent climber for what it is. It is a steel single pivot bike, and it is long. It's coil sprung, but it's relatively composed and calm, and that's pretty nice when you're climbing up technical things and want a ton of traction.
Right. So what about when you're on the fire road, Kaz? Are you reaching down for that lever to make things a little bit quieter, or?
Not usually. There's a 3-position. It's actually high-speed compression, but basically acts the same on that Öhlins shock, so you can firm it up. But I was usually happy leaving it alone. Again, it's another bike with a nice steep seat tube angle. That really helps calm down a bike's pedaling manners. You do stand up and crank. There's a little bit more suspension motion, but nothing like you'll find on that Ghost Riot. It's a much calmer climber than that bike. This one, it is kind of that sit and spin bike, just kind of cruising along. It's not super snappy, but it's not dull. And people do think steel, super heavy. This bike actually wasn't crazy heavy. It's about the same weight as that Alloy Stumpjumper Evo that we have. So 34 pounds. That's with double down tire in the rear and
Yeah.
a coil shock. So that's pretty reasonable, really.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think it's somewhere around 2 pounds lighter than the aluminum Ghost, which sort of blew my mind.
Kaz and I are a little bit differently proportioned, and Kaz is a tiny bit taller, and so for me, it was just a little too long. There's a weird spread where we were on a size large, which was a 485 mil reach, and the size medium is 450, so that's a huge spread. And so I'm kind of caught in the middle between sizes, and I found it really hard to be on such a long bike and feel like I had to be over the front end and over the rear end, and those are two different places. Like I couldn't be in all those places at once. And so that meant a lot of kind of forward, backward shifting, which to me felt pretty awkward to ride.
Yeah.
It wasn't bad, it was just not ideal.
Fair enough. Guys, I don't exactly think efficiency when I see steel, one pivot, and a coil sprung shock. How did this thing do in the efficiency test?
It was 4th out of 6th, so not the slowest, not the least efficient.
Yeah.
So kind of middle of the pack, which, I mean, that kind of matches what I would expect. It doesn't feel, like I said, it doesn't feel horribly slow. Like it gets the job done. So yeah, it kind of matches my expectations.
You're finally at the top of the hill. It's taken a little bit longer than usual, but that's okay.
It's been comfortable.
It's been comfortable. Time to go back down. You mentioned something there, an enduro bike. Is this thing close to that?
It's pretty close. Yeah, its manners are definitely that way. It has one of the slacker head angles out of this group of bikes we have. I think with the 150 fork, it's a 65 degrees, a touch under, I think. And that longer front end, even longer back end, 445 millimeter chainstay. So definitely tracks well in a straight line.
Yeah.
And it has a different feel. You know, steel bikes, I would say that on a hardtail, you know, steel gets a reputation to be nice and comfy and compliant and versus aluminum. But when I ride hardtails, I have trouble telling the difference between a steel hardtail and aluminum sometimes.
Yeah.
They're hardtails. This bike, with the full suspension and that, you know, those kind of thinner tubes in the back, there is a different ride feel.
Yep.
It does feel, there's more flex. There's no doubt about it. So when you're cornering and loading it hard, it just has this way of tracking that I liked. I'd call it carvy.
Yeah.
Bigger riders, they might notice it and it might not be as much for them. But for me, I really liked how this bike just kind of smooths everything out.
Yeah. Alicia, I'm curious how the Murmur compares to maybe, say, the Ghost on the descents. Geometry-wise, they're pretty different,
Geometry-wise, they're incredibly different.
but they're kind of made to do the same thing. So how does that work out?
Yeah, the Ghost is a little bit between the Jib and the Starling. Like it's trying to be both a little bit.
Yeah.
But the Starling is so much longer that it has the stability that the Ghost lacks. And it is so stable. Like once
Yeah.
you point it downhill, it'll pick up speed in a straight line so nicely, and it feels glued to the ground, but not in a heavy, not in a heavy bad way.
Yeah.
It's just nice.
Alicia, you touched on something there that we should probably expand on, that stability. So how does the Murmur compare to the other trail bikes that you have if a rider needs something that's more stable when it's fast and rough?
Yeah, so all these bikes are a little varied, and some fit into a particular category of riding better than others. And the Starling, I think, fits really well into fast, rough, steep trails with the slack head angle and the really long bike. I think it was more stable than nimble compared to some of the other bikes. Some bikes wanted to pop through corners really nicely, and this bike mostly wanted to track on the ground super nicely, and then it would hop over when asked to, but it wasn't really inclined to just pop around as much as some others. Is that kind of what you felt, Kaz?
Yeah, definitely. I do think when it comes to how poppy the bike is, I was impressed that it didn't take as much effort to get off the ground as I thought. Like even compared to, let's say maybe the Jib almost is a little bit more ground hugging than this bike with the coil shock. It just has a nice reboundy feel. I don't know if that's from the frame or the coil shock combination going on there, but there's a few jumps in these trails, and it was pretty easy to load the bike up, get it airborne, touch back down nicely. But yeah, again, definitely more inclined to be best at the straight, chunky stuff. And that's where this bike really shines.
So that brings me to my next question. What happens when it's not straight and fast? What happens when it's tight and slow? This is a long bike, Alicia. Is this also a slow bike in those settings?
In some of the corners, for me personally, it felt like it would crawl around the corners a little bit, but in faster, more open corners, it wanted to track through just so well. I think it can hold an arc and hold a line super cleanly, but when it was a little tight, it did slow down a bit.
Yeah, I think some of the shorter bikes, maybe that Propane Hugene, or even maybe the Score with a shorter back end, if you are super tight things, it's a little bit easier to kind of get the back end around. But this one, it does have that nice calm feel. So it kind of, there's a lot of room for you to move front and back on the bike. I like that about it. So Yeah, it's a big bike, but manageable.
You
All
could
right.
plan ahead too. It did whatever you wanted.
Yeah.
Just took advance notice.
So all the other bikes that we have here are using some kind of links to actuate the shock. This bike is not. It's a single pivot setup. Kaz, tell me about suspension action.
Yeah, I was totally happy with it. Single pivots, they still have a bad rap that I feel like is left over from the late 90s, early 2000s when single pivot bikes didn't work as well. These days, companies have figured out how to make them do exactly what they should, and they're super predictable. So this bike, when you're hard on the brakes and steep terrain, where it sits in its travel, it feels nice. It's kind of pushing it into the ground, but there's no unexpected surprises. So predictability more than anything, and I think it works well.
Yeah. Alicia, what about at the other end of the stroke? Bottom out.
For me, it wasn't harsh at all. I think it would be easy to assume a bike like this would just blow through its travel, and I didn't experience that. I think it was pretty well supported, and the coil shock found a nice balance between being sensitive but not being too sensitive.
Okay. So I'm going to push back on something here. You guys have talked about how this bike almost feels almost enduro-ish, you know, like it's pretty dang capable. But I'm looking at your time testing results and it was the second slowest out of 6 bikes. So why do you think that was?
I mean, enduro riding is different from enduro racing, right?
Of course.
You can have an enduro bike that isn't going to be the fastest enduro racer. And I mean, racing is just one way to judge a bike. So time testing, it was the second from the bottom for both of us. However, it was a very comfortable ride and really clean and smooth and confidence inspiring.
Yeah.
And that enjoyment for many of us, myself sort of included, may count more than actual timed riding.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do still think you could race it. Like this could be a race bike, and out of all the bikes here, some of them I wouldn't really consider entering an enduro race with them, just so they'd feel a little undergunned.
Well, you wouldn't take the Ghost to an EWS race? What?
Yeah,
Come on, guys.
unfortunately not. Maybe
It would be a fun video.
Das not good.
Yeah, let's skip that. But yeah, this one I would happily roll up to an enduro race and be just fine. Like I wouldn't even have second thoughts. Where some of the other ones I might have to think about switching things out, more
Yep.
powerful brakes, whatever. But this one, you could definitely race this. You know, it is supposed to be an aggressive trail bike, but realistically, it's a little closer to that enduro category.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about some spec choices now. If you were to order a bike from Starling, you could get just a frame, you could get almost, like, they do all sorts of build kits, all sorts of stuff that's pretty interesting. Ours also came with some interesting stuff. 11-speed drivetrain and a flat handlebar, Kaz. What do you think?
Both of those I didn't really like.
Really?
Yeah,
You
I
can't
know.
ride without 12 cogs?
It turns out it's harder than I last remembered.
Why? Explain, please.
Yeah. So we're here in Pemberton. I obviously can use an 11-speed drivetrain, 10, 9, 8. I've used them all over the years, but I think I've gotten a little spoiled. Here, a lot of the rides start with a fairly steep climb, whether it's going up the fire road or up the single track, and it's nice to have that easier 50-tooth or 52-tooth cog. This, being an 11-speed drivetrain, had 46-tooth. I think it's more of a supply issue than anything, because on Starling's drop-down menu, you can purchase 12-speed stuff. So that's what I would put on my own bike. If I live somewhere a little bit flatter, it wouldn't be a big deal. But this bike, I'll take all the help I can get.
Alicia, I know you're a lot stronger than Kaz. You're fine with that 46-tooth cog at the
Sure,
back?
I'm not. It made me feel pretty inadequate, to be honest here.
What about that flat handlebar, though?
Flat handlebar was my other. So Kaz and I actually have pretty similar issues with the bike for different reasons. My problem is I was following Kaz up the fire road and I struggled way more than he did, and I'm a little sore about it.
I had that nice easy 52. I was just like happily on the light.
Eagle!
Flapping the wings, and she had to it was noticeable.
It was a grind. It was so steep. Combined with the flat handlebar, the first ride I had the seat kind of way back, and I was like, this is the visual representation of me on the bike.
You were just doing a Superman.
It was bad. Yeah, my back hurt. But we got the bike a little more dialed after that. I slammed the seat forward, and with that flat bar, I sort of made peace with things. I just had to accept being pulled a little more over the front of the bike and a little different riding position than I'm normally used to.
Yeah. And the good thing is, of course, that stuff is easy to change.
Yep,
and
easy to swap.
like I mentioned earlier, Starling is a small operation and they're pretty flexible as far as spec choice goes. So you can just kind of spec the bike how you see fit, eh?
Yep, I would say with that flat bar, I'd definitely go with a riser bar, even if not for the new position, but in order so that the shifter doesn't hit the top tube.
Yeah.
Because the shifter you put in the normal spot, when you turn the bars, when I do my X-ups out there, it contacts the top tube. It'll go through, but it did kind of like ding up the sticker on the top a little bit. So even just 10 mils more rise would fix that.
You don't just want to put a centimeter spacers underneath the stem caps?
You could do that too if you wanted. Yeah. But a riser bar would be an easy way to, and while I'm talking about this, the top tube isn't actually that high. It's just initially it kind of starts a little higher. It does slow back. So I didn't have any like standover issues, but just where the bar would go. So high rise bars are highly recommended.
Let's get to models, spec, and pricing now. This is pretty simple, Kaz. Take it away.
So basically, there's just a frame-only option. That's 1,920 pounds. And then if you go on Starling's website, there's a different drop-down menu that allows you to kind of fully customize it. A certain number of options It's not super extensive for each thing, but you can tweak little bits. You can even get a custom frame if you wanted to. So if this geometry doesn't work for you, for an additional charge, they can just make exactly what you want. Make some crazy Grim Donut copy if you felt like it.
Not a good idea, Starling. Don't do that. All right, next up is pros and cons. We're gonna start with Miss Positive. What did you like?
It's positive over here.
Right?
It is a bike that feels really predictable and easy to trust, which I loved. It has a pretty unique ride feel. It's a little bit different from a lot of what you see out there, but overall, it's so capable if you're gonna ride on steep, rowdy, rough trails.
Yeah, I love the fact that this thing isn't a bike that you see everywhere. So for me, that's a huge pro.
I think it's a pretty simple design, which is, I think, great for maintenance and just, simplicity is good for its own sake. And then...
Wait. Didn't the pivot come loose on this bike? Didn't
Yes.
the pivot back halfway out?
Kaz can talk about that in the cons.
To the cons!
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's necessarily a con, but the pivot bolt did become loose at partway through the testing. So I tightened it up and it's been good ever since. But the good thing is there's only one pivot bolt. Well, two, but one main pivot. So pretty simple. So yeah, simple design.
You don't have any spare pivots, so if you lose that one, you're
It's true.
screwed.
Yeah, there's nothing to keep it together. But,
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, the simple design I think is a pro. As far as cons go, I think that ride feel might not be for everybody, especially bigger riders. Like Flexi's might be the right and the wrong word. Flexi, I tend to think of something that's flexy in a bad way, just wiggling everywhere. That's not this bike, but it's also not your super crisp, snappy pedaler.
Yeah.
So if you used to a stiff aluminum or a stiff carbon bike, you used to hop on the pedals or pushing hard in turns. This one has a totally different feel that I enjoyed, but I could see a bigger rider. It might just be a little more vague than they're looking for.
Okay, we're gonna wrap this up by talking about who best suits the Starling Murmur. Alicia, who's that person?
This person, I think, is looking for something really utilitarian with a little bit of style because it's a beautiful bike and it's so unique. And you can get pretty much whatever parts you want. And so the ideal rider, I think, is going to be a little bit particular and want to self-select whatever parts they prefer. And then it's going to be someone who lives near steep, rowdy, rough trails, mostly fall line, less someone looking for kind of a low-speed, nimble tech bike, but more just a rowdy rock crusher.
There you go. That is the Starling Murmur from Pinkbike's fall field test. Let us know in the comments, is steel real or are you more of a carbon person? And remember to subscribe so you don't miss any videos.